All right. Okay, cool. Slightly better sound, so hopefully we can all hear us all a little better this time. Thank you again. So we've got another panel coming up. For those of you who joined us on the first one, great, thank you. We've got another cool one. We're going to be looking at Azure for startups, in particular, looking at the cloud and the value of the cloud. My name is Eric Overfield. I'm a Microsoft MVP. I'm also a Microsoft Regional Director. Enough about me. Now it's about the panel. If you could just tell me your name, what you do for Microsoft as well. After they're done, I need questions, people. We want lots of questions. You don't want me asking them.
Awesome. So my name is Paige Bailey. I'm a cloud developer advocate specialized in machine learning and AI, and I work at Microsoft in Redmond. So if you have any questions about Azure, any questions about ML or AI, feel free to hit me up. I think my Twitter handle, it's right there. So always happy to answer questions.
Hi, my name is Ishiyama-Levy. I come from the sunny land of Singapore, where I lead Xamariners, which is Xamarin and Azure-centric dev house. I am Xamarin and Visual Studio MVP. If you want to know about monkeys, just ask me. Xamarin are monkeys. Xamarin, yeah. Long live the monkeys.
Hey everybody, my name is Anthony Chu. I also am a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. I do .NET, Node.js, Kubernetes, and all the stuff that says back here apparently. That's me.
So what questions have we got for Azure startups? We're in the middle of startup country. We got to have some good questions. No? All right. Hopefully you'll think of them. One of my first questions is, so what is Microsoft doing for startups? Like what kind of offerings are there? And how can startups get started with Microsoft?
So one thing that Microsoft has recently launched are reactor spaces located around the world. So if you live in London, if you live in Seattle, if you live in San Francisco, there is a reactor very close to you. And what these spaces are intended to be are kind of spaces like WeWork, if you're familiar with that. Co-working spaces completely devoted to community. So you can go there. With your startup, you can work on Azure products or not necessarily Azure products, and there will be a place for you to go about doing your whatever technology of choice you have. The Seattle reactor space is fantastic. I believe we're officially launching it soon, and London's official launch was last week. So if you have any questions about reactor spaces, come and talk to me after. I'd be delighted to tell you a little bit more. And also Azure credits for startups. So if you have an idea that you would like to see funded, we have the $200 Azure offering for the first year, but we also have much larger grants for Azure credits, so in the thousands of dollars. And that's an incredibly big win for startups who are trying to get started with compute capacity, with hard drive space, with getting their app up off the ground. So,
I can do that a little bit. So I used to have a few startups back in my days, which is my current company was a startup and it kind of graduated. Microsoft was of tremendous help during this time. It was, at the time, the program was called BSpark. Yes. So for 3 different startups, I actually used BSpark. 2 of them, didn't go necessarily right, but doesn't matter. The last one was very, very, very good.
That's actually a really good success.
Yes, that is true. So what does BSpark offered to us that was of great help? First of all, licenses for absolutely everything. For servers, for Visual Studio licenses. At the time, there was no Visual Studio community, and that was relatively not extremely expensive, but when you're a startup, you just have to count your pennies. You had licenses for databases, some Azure credit as well, from all your infrastructure, i.e. Office and so on. And literally, there would have been a much difficult problem to solve without all that. That's pretty much it.
And also, I want to make sure to mention we have a guy named Chad Fowler that we just recently hired at Microsoft. And how many of you guys in the audience have a startup or are thinking about starting a startup? Okay, awesome. So in that case, I demand that you hit up Chad Fowler on Twitter. Just assault him with questions. He would be delighted to hear them, but he is specifically tasked for making the startup experience on Azure as great as possible. So he and his team would be delighted to help you through any of the processes you were talking about before, and that's great that you had so many resources to help you with yours. And the comment that I made to him was 1 out of 3 being successful as a startup is actually like rock hard awesome. So, excellent.
Yes, question.
So many people that are starting out feel that the language they choose is such a gamble. Is it C#, C++, is it Java, JavaScript, Node.js? What can you do to sort of ease the on-ramp using the resources of Azure?
So you mean that with you currently have existing resources that are in a specific platform, which is, what is your specialty already?
Well, I'm an educator, so I've got students, and they are constantly worried about, okay, if I learn Java, can I run on Azure? If I learn,
Azure is kind of platform agnostic, since Microsoft went more to the open side of the world, which is really, really good. Although there's something that is true when you look at the most popular languages and platforms at present by just surveys done on various platforms. Anyways, C#, especially in its open source incantation as .NET Standard is a very, very good choice because it is relatively simple, very similar to Java, and runs on everything. So if you are using Java, for instance, you'll be able to do some websites pretty much, and some Android applications. With C#, you'll be able to deploy website as a server. Now you can even deploy website as WebAssembly. Basically, instead of using React.js or other popular frameworks like Angular, you can more or less deploy C# directly into your web. You can deploy to mobile phones, iOS, Android. You can deploy to Mac, to Linux, to Tizen, to anything really. And the support is tremendous, and it is open source and pretty ongoing. Java used to be a very popular learning language. The problem is that it's been starting a while back, and I could say that the maintenance through various owners haven't been just always optimal. It's been relatively fragmented, I believe. But anyways, as an education, I live in Singapore, and I talk often with the Ministry of Education as well, that ask me more or less the same question. We have students, they want to get into engineering, which is not popular in Singapore until kind of fairly recently. And we partner with Microsoft to help them just to get into the .NET ladder, because literally you can deploy everything, it's easy to use, great support, and usually you have some tremendous community all over the world. Just look at any meetup in your area, and you'll be able just to get and learn C# pretty much for free with just experts.
Yeah, and the comment that I would want to make is that, you know, who can predict what's going to happen in 5 years, right? So I come to Microsoft not from the C# side, but from Python and R, which again is not something that you would really anticipate to see from Microsoft until just recently, right? But the recent push towards open source has kind of made it a delightful place for Python and R people too. But the thing that you want to teach your students isn't so much the tool or the programming language as much as the concepts behind it, right? So teach them data structures, teach them algorithms, teach them kind of the skills that they would need in order to pick up a new language quickly. Because that's the only thing that's going to stay in our field, is that you're going to have to keep learning. So that's the comment that I would make.
So I have a follow-up question on that.
I can talk about Python all day if you want.
I was going to stay away from Python. Well, close though. So Microsoft is known for having like enterprise development tools. It's designed for a lot of enterprise developers, Visual Studio, etc. But you know, I'm here in San Francisco. This is all about open source community. And is Azure, for one, is it really looking at open source as a first-class citizen?
Oh, absolutely. Like, my team even has an open source subgroup. and everything, like, in terms of virtual machines on Azure, we've got Ubuntu, we've got CentOS. Any of the open source languages that you were mentioning before are all first-class citizens on Azure. We have open source tools being developed by Microsoft. So Visual Studio Code, if you guys have played with that, completely open source. We have a free version of Visual Studio, the community edition that's out. Like Microsoft really does feel that open source is the way to go, and our strategy for Azure is to make sure that all of those open source tools you love, you can use it on our platform, you can use it on other people's platforms in collaboration with our platform, but really it's all about making the developer experience as streamlined and awesome as possible. So if you want to use open source tools, sure, come and use them on our infrastructure. Yep.
Do I get to speak now? Yeah, so another thing about open source in Azure is that actually a lot of the Azure services now are becoming open source. So one of my favorite ones, Azure Functions, great session happening tomorrow afternoon, please come, is almost 100% open source. So I actually have a couple lines of code that I wrote that's actually running in Azure Functions. So you can do that too. And it's great, so everything's happening in the open. We're really embracing open source, even like really kind of legacy or like things that have been at Microsoft for quite a while. We're starting to open source them. So this week we announced that we're open sourcing Service Fabric, which is something that's been around in Microsoft for about 10 years. So that's going to be 100% open source in hopefully pretty soon. The Linux one's already open source. We're working on the Windows one. So I think as a company, and .NET as well, we made that 100% open source. So I think we as a company are just basically completely betting on open source because I think these days, I think that's the way to go.
And especially in the machine learning and AI space, like every tool that we use is probably going to be open source. So scikit-learn if you're playing with Python for machine learning, TensorFlow for deep learning, CNTK, which is a Microsoft framework for deep learning, all of those are open source packages. So really, if you want to be big in that space, you have to play with open source. So, yeah.
And just going back to the talk I gave a bit earlier about the blockchain, another project of exactly Project Coco, which is going to be solving a lot of problems that quite a few frameworks currently have on the blockchain, and that is also going to be open sourced this year.
You set me up for that. I have a 15-minute intro to blockchain tomorrow right here, so at 11:30, please join me. Questions, please. I'll keep asking, but I'd rather hear yours. Please.
So, how to qualify for Azure? Sorry. Yeah, so my question is how to qualify for a startup service? What's the eligibility criteria?
How do you get started?
How do you get started for startups? So if you come up afterwards, I can give you a quick link to go and look at Microsoft for Startups.
Do you know what that would be offhand for everybody?
So I think it's aka.ms/startups, but I am not sure.
And the other one would be just startups.microsoft.com. That's the one I know of.
Excellent. Yeah. So there are multiple options for you to get started, and I would be happy to talk with you and to hunt down your local startup representative, because I guarantee you've got one.
So I have a kind of a one-on-one question. I'm new to Azure. I maybe heard this cloud computing thing. I've got an idea. I'm a student. So like, what are the actual offerings within Azure which helps me be agile, which helps me be nimble, and like, what are some concrete technologies I'm going to be looking at within Azure?
Yes, so, the whole ecosystem on Azure, or literally on the development lifecycle, including DevOps, is kind of provided by Microsoft. So let's say that you want to build a mobile application, because I've got to say that, because I represent Xamarin. Historically, developing a mobile phone application, especially deploying it, testing it, was tremendously difficult. There is a new offering called App Center that allows to literally put I'm losing my French now. To put together all the different offerings that you need for developing mobile phone manipulation, such as push notification, deployment, testing, building. You literally don't need to write a line of DevOps code, and that will just come directly to you. You will be able then to also develop your mobile application using Xamarin Framework, which is free and open source as well, using Visual Studio, which is free and open source, Visual Studio on Mac, which is free and open source as well, in a very easy manner. Then straight from your IDE, you could actually deploy your application straight into your testing environment, or into the App Store if you want, or into the Play Store without any other issue, or just simply route that through your App Center that will in turn kick like a continuous integration process and deploy it to where you want. So that is just for the client side of things. Then for the actual server side of things, you'll have literally quite a lot of options. Good old web APIs that will be running literally in a VM and well, being pretty heavyweight, I suppose, but that will do the job and serve your request. You've got the ability to use Azure Functions, as discussed before, that will pretty much use the microservice architecture, which is much more modular, and that will allow you just to maintain your application in a nice way. You can use Kubernetes/Docker, which is also part of Azure, to use container in order to deploy your application. That is part of the offering as well. The list is literally endless.
Absolutely. And the other great thing about the process now, if you're a student, is that you don't even need a credit card to sign up. So as long as you have a verified student email address, a verified student account, you're able to get an account on Azure for free and start using all of those free resources. So on the data science side, we have just as many offerings as you mentioned there too. So if you spin up a data science virtual machine, every package that you would want to use to do machine learning is there and ready for you waiting. So Python, R, Julia, whatever language you want, it's there. And the nice thing too is that for the first year as an Azure customer, even if you are using it for free without a credit card as a student, you get 750 hours of compute time on a virtual machine. And that's either a Windows virtual machine or a Linux virtual machine. There's also a whole big long list of free resources offered on Azure, specifically for data scientists, but also for just everybody. And those services are always free. So it's great to have that infrastructure available. And if you have any questions about that either, all of us are ready and waiting and chomping at the bit to talk to you about them. So.
Super quickly. Something that is pretty important is the documentation that is provided with our services. So you've got multiple ways to get to documentation, but now on Azure, you've got for every single service, you'll have some templates, some starter kits that are provided literally within your service control panel. So you can literally click on a button, download some sample code, and run it without having to do anything else. No search. You don't need to look around the internet. It's all there.
Excellent. And I also have to say this, because we were talking about open source before. All of the documentation on Microsoft.com is open source as well. So yeah, so if you go and look up a service, you look at a tutorial or a walkthrough, what you'll see in the top right corner is a little edit pencil. If you click on that, it takes you straight to the GitHub repository towards where that documentation is housed. And you can even make a pull request and modify it if you want to add something else. So that's kind of awesome. We have an entire community filled with thousands, if not tens of thousands, of contributors to our Microsoft documentation to make sure that it is amazing.
Open source documentation, I love it.
Yeah.
I want a quick follow-up on the education. So is that all education from like kindergarten all the way up to college, or is it more narrow?
For the education for Microsoft products?
Yeah. You talked about the Azure credits that for students don't even need a credit card. What's the age limit, shall we say?
I don't believe that there is an age limit for the student criteria, but I can check on that for you as well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Something else about Azure. So what about scalability? I mean, is this going to be something that I'm a startup, I have one VM, is it going to be easy to scale when I have an Azure function? Is the Azure function going to be easily growing, or do I have to keep doing lots of IT pro work?
Kubernetes man, you want to take this?
Yeah, so there's been a lot of talk about VMs. Really, if I were a startup, I actually wouldn't use VMs. I would actually use something that's at least 1 or 2 levels above it. So the thing about the cloud, not just Azure, is that you can deploy your application and let the cloud worry about your infrastructure, right? And with something like Azure Functions, or just serverless in general, you're just deploying pieces of code that run. Basically, you're only writing the code that only you know how to write, and everything else is done for you. Something like Azure Functions will just scale up to basically almost infinitely, but when it's idle, you don't pay for any of it. Another thing that I can think of is something like Cosmos DB, right? So one of the advantages of Cosmos DB is that you don't have to learn something new to use Cosmos DB. It implements a bunch of APIs. So for instance, if you're a Node.js developer and use MongoDB, you can use the MongoDB API and basically the exact same drivers, exact same applications that use MongoDB right now, and access Cosmos DB. And Cosmos DB, you can start off with a very small instance for about $25 a month. You get it free for the first year. But if you need to scale out to basically massively petabytes of data, tons of compute to 40 regions around the world, it's this exact same database that you're scaling up. So you can start off with very little and grow as you need to. So basically what you're paying really matches the profile of basically the revenue of your company. So you no longer have to worry about provisioning a bunch of VMs, paying for it, while you're basically waiting for your first customer.
And something that Scott Guthrie always likes to mention on his Red Shirt Dev Tour is that if you use functions intelligently, like Anthony was saying, you only pay for the compute time that it's actually running, and that can be very little. So there was one customer who noticed that their bill for a database was something to the tune of I think it was $40 a month, whereas previously it had been more like $400, and they thought that we had a billing error, but no, it was just because they had implemented Azure Functions. So lots and lots of calls, but very small amount of compute.
I have about 10 more questions, but we have only about 2 minutes left. So I thought one nice thing, I've got my notebook in my hand, go down the line or whatever. What are one or maybe your top 3 things I should take away on what can I do to get started? I'm a startup company. I'm looking at Azure, what's a link that I should pay attention to? What's a technology I should pay attention to? What would be in your top 3? Name 3, name your top 1.
Excellent. So I will start with docs.microsoft.com. If you have any questions about any of the Microsoft products, there will be a place for you there. And I guess you mentioned 3 things, so I'll say 1, you say 1, you say 1.
Well, I've got no choice but to say Xamarin because Xamarin is awesome.
We also have documentation for that.
There's a lot of documentation for that. It's all so beautiful and great. And remember, you just develop once and deploy pretty much to all the platform natively and soon to the web as a progressive web app. Yes, sirs.
One thing.
Or top 3. You can keep going.
Cool. So I would actually, to get started, I would actually try to hunt down a Microsoft representative that's in your region. I was at a startup before. I'm from Vancouver. And literally, I could send an email to this person I know at Microsoft, and they would come out and sit beside me and solve any problem that I have. And these are actually engineers that are coming out with, you don't have to talk to salespeople. It's fantastic. Sometimes they might not be available and they'll tell you to go somewhere else, but I would always try to reach out to a real person if you can.
Keep adding.
Oh, yeah. And I just want to point out, all of our Twitter handles are on the board immediately behind us. And all of us live online. So 24/7, if you want to ping us about a problem, our job is to fix it. Or at least Anthony and my job.
Yeah, something else as well is going to be Azure Bootcamp season this month, isn't it? Yes, just check out, Google Azure Bootcamp. It's happening in your town next to you. It's literally a global event happening the same day all over the world. I'll be speaking in Singapore at Azure Bootcamp. Just go to your local one and check out your meetups as well. Literally put whatever technology you want to learn about, Azure, .NET, whatever. There is bound to be an event at least every month or multiple times a month.
Amazing. Thank you so very much for joining us all, spending your evening here on your first day. Paige, Ben, Anthony, I really appreciate all your time. Again, thank you all. I think they're all going to stay up here after this, so if you've got more questions, come on up and until we get kicked out, right? All right, have a good evening, everybody. Thank you.